Alright, we're here. We're back with Final Fantasy V. We're going to make a tier list of Final Fantasy V jobs with bias towards 4 Job Fiesta style runs. So to go over, the tiers. S tier is kind of be your, your broken classes that are almost always useful. The best of the best. The A tier are going to be the classes you're always happy to get, that are pretty useful, can be really strong in certain situations, or pretty generally useful. B tier, it's going to be your more niche ones that in certain fights and certain team comps and with certain setup can be strong. C tier is going to be the classes you'd really rather have something else. And then D tier is going to be kind of the unranked jobs. So, first up, we're going to grab the Knight. Let's see here. I'm going to put Knight in A or B tier. I'm going to put it in A tier for now. We can rearrange things down the line. The Knight, his innate ability is Guard, which is able to completely negate any physical damage. This actually, in conjunction with Cover, is able to completely trivialize certain fights. Not a ton, but a few fights in the game. Otherwise, Knights are great tanks, able to soak up damage. They can put out great damage with double grip ability, allowing them to wield one sword with two hands. They have access to their own special Knight swords, which can be useful. So overall, a pretty well-rounded class. It's going to be generally useful most of the time, so we're going to put him in A tier. Also has his maximum level 6 ability, Equipped Swords, is one of the highest strength transfer abilities. And so that can be useful in setting up certain physical attackers with either Equipped Sword or Double Grip. Okay, next up we're going to rank the Monk. So the Monk I'm going to go ahead and put in B tier. Early on, the Monk is going to have very high physical damage. The Monk's natural ability to crit can be useful for certain bosses with high defense, as the crit will pierce through. The Monk's inherent ability, command ability, is Kick, which is a weak area of effect ability. It's not terribly useful, but you're mostly using Monk just as a high health, high physical damage class. The Brawl ability that he learns at level 2 is one of the highest strength transfer abilities. So it can be good to boost your physical damage on maybe weaker early classes, such as Black Mage or Thief. However, in a 4 Job Fiesta setting, you're mostly just going to be stuck with 4 monks, punching the crap out of everything. Their max ability is at the end, tail end 5, 6, 7, they get HP plus 10%, 20%, 30%. If you wanted to just really need a high health pool to survive certain things, otherwise you're mostly going to be spending time just punching things. You do get counter and an ability build up, which can be useful against bosses that like to counterattack. But generally, the Monk is a pretty straightforward class. With the right setup, their damage can become insane, usually with a Chemist or a Bard to buff them up. Otherwise, they start pretty strong, and they do have the benefit of their damage scales really well with level, but in the mid to late game, they can kind of fall off. So the next class is the Thief. Now the Thief, again, I'm probably going to put in B tier. It's more situational. The Thief does have a lot of quality of life things. His command ability is Steal, which can be pretty useful throughout the game. His level 1 ability, Passages, which is one of his passive abilities. While you have him equipped, you get to see all the secret passages, which is nice if you're newer to the game, but the veterans will know more of where the useful secret passages are. One of my favorite abilities the Thief learns at level 2 is Flee. The ability to immediately escape battle. Can help you get through a lot of annoying random battles and cut down on time. It's handy to have. He gets the Dash ability, which is able to increase your overworld movement in dungeons. He can transfer the Steel Command. He learns Caution, which is another really good quality of life, which is one of his innate passive abilities that prevents back attacks, so that's just handy to have. He does learn Mug, where you can steal and attack in the same move, but his ultimate ability, level 7 ability, is just a transfer speed plus 16. I think this is one of, if not the only ways to transfer speed through an ability, so it can be useful, but it's more situational. So Thief ends up in the B tier. Next on the list is the Black Mage. So the Black Mage, I'm going to go ahead and put in A tier. Black Mage, pretty early on, is able to put out good damage pretty consistently. When you do get into those scenarios where you're able to abuse an elemental weakness, it becomes very, very powerful, of course. Breaking Rods early in the game, very powerful, able to cheese some bosses. And does have a few useful status moves. Sleep is able to completely break certain bosses. Break is able to be excuse me, useful in a lot of fights. Later on, you get to level 6 magic. Flare is just always useful, and you're able to boost up your elemental damage as well by switching rods around. So overall, great damage dealer throughout pretty much the whole game. So he's pretty useful. His ultimate ability is just a simple MP plus 30%, but his level 6 magic is, I think, the highest magic transfer at plus 31. So it's really useful for boosting up any other magic-based classes or abilities. The Black Mage is pretty much always wanted, pretty high tier, but not quite into the broken tier. So next is the White Mage. White Mage, arguably maybe the best support class. Support classes in Final Fantasy V can actually be pretty darn useful for the most part. White Mage gonna be your main healer if you get it for most of the game. Still pretty high magic stat, but not quite as high as the Black Mage. Some pretty useful status effects you gain through White Magic. Mute, super useful in a few fights. Protect is always useful. Image, Shell, Charm, Berserk, Reflect. A lot of things are super useful. You're never gonna be sad to have a White Mage. Damage-wise, they don't do a lot until you get Holy pretty late into the game. But once you do get Holy, they can also be a great damage dealer. But yeah, overall, pretty super useful for any time in the game. If you do start with White Mage, it is a little slow getting started to your next job, but you're pretty darn safe, and you do have a good spot to grind in the ship graveyard. Next class we're going to go over is the Blue Mage. Now the Blue Mage I'm going to be putting as our first S tier. The Blue Mage is kind of tricky in that you kind of need a lot of setup. But the Blue Mage is a very versatile class. You're able to wield swords, rods, and shields, and even daggers. So So you can be a backup physical damage dealer. You have a crazy amount of utility with all the blue magic. Blue magic itself is a good, pretty strong magic transfer. You can get pretty early on, plus 23 magic. You have access to healing and support moves. White Wind being an amazing healing spell. What else? Late in the game, you get things like Guard Off, Dark Shock. You get a lot of debuffs that'll be useful in certain situations. Once you get late into the game, you can pick up Mighty Guard, which is an amazing support ability. You get between level 5 Doom and Dark Shock, level 2 Old, and a few other spells, you're able to cheese quite a few bosses and get just free wins. And even not, you're still a pretty decent, you know, kind of like a Black Mage, just elemental damage between Arrow, the Flamethrower ability, and some other stuff. That if you're able to pick up 1,000 needles early on in the game, that's also pretty broken. Ignores any kind of defenses. It's just straight 1,000 damage for 25 MP. So it's pretty strong, especially early on, and even late in the game can still be pretty useful. So the Blue Mage is one of the first broken classes, we'll call it, and also able to break rods early on in the game. So super useful. Okay, so that covers it for the Wind Crystal job, the 3 physical classes and 3 magic classes. So moving on, so the Water Crystal jobs. First up, we're going to look at the, make sure I'm still kind of centered here. The Mystic Knight. Let's see where he's hiding. Mystic Knight, I'm going to actually, I think, put into the B tier. There are times where the Mystic Knight is incredibly powerful and is able to do some pretty broken stuff, but it's a lot more situational than these other classes. Similar to the Black Mage, when you're able to abuse elemental weaknesses, the Mystic Knight becomes very powerful. And late into the game, things like Break Blade can be really useful against random mobs. You get super late, your level 6 magic ability, you can have both Holy Sword, Flare Sword, things like that. You do have access to Sleep Sword and Mute Sword, which will be useful in a couple fights, but generally it's a lot more niche. Mystic Knight is interesting in that he's able to transfer both plus to magic and plus to strength, but I think he's more of a kind of niche pick. So we'll move on to our next one, Time Mage. I'll be honest, Time Mage is one class I'm not as familiar with, but more of a support-based class. Can be pretty useful. His ability to cast Haste 2 and haste your whole party opens up the need to equip for running shoes on everybody. So opens, basically just by existing, opens up 4 equipment slots potentially, because most of the time end game you're going to want just haste on everybody, but still is more of a niche pick. His damage options aren't amazing. You do get Comet and Meteo kind of late, which can be good for damage, but overall I don't feel like the Time Mage's utility is as useful outside of Haste 2. You do have the ability to do some interesting things like escape from dungeons, cast Float, reset fights, and maybe even do some percent-based damage, but in my experience, the Time Mage isn't as generally useful. So moving on to the next class. And the Time Mage has, I think, about the same level of magic transfer as the White Mage. Maybe it's a little less. So Time Mage could be good paired up on another mage, but it would depend on your party. Next we'll cover this Summoner. which is down here. Again, I think I want to put Summoner maybe low A tier, maybe high B tier. He's kind of on the border for me. Is generally speaking more overall versatile. I'll put him on the bottom of the A tier. Your magic damage is going to be pretty high, and you do have pretty high magic transfer as well. It ramps up. It starts a little lower and ramps up pretty high once you get to level 5 summon magic. But you have a lot of mix of utility summons and just good AoE damage summons. So he is pretty overall versatile, although you will have likely run into MP problems. But if you're able to mitigate, you know, having to deal with MP, he can be pretty strong. You have access to good elemental magic as well as things like Golem for a shield. Carbuncle, you can set up Reflect. You can set up Phoenix to revive. Some of your basic ones, Chocobo, Sylph Remora. Oh, you can Remora can, I think, paralyze. So he has some stuff you can do. It's usually never a bad thing to be having a summon. There's usually something you can do. It's good for damage. His max ability, Call, you're able to do a random summon. So once you do max out, you do have a way to kind of mitigate spending MP, because Call doesn't cost any MP, but overall, he's pretty good. But we'll kind of keep him up with the A tiers here. The next class is the Red Mage. Now the Red Mage might be the first in the C tier for me. I really dislike the Red Mage. Might be low B tier. We'll put him in low B tier for now. The Red Mage, when we first start off, he's pretty alright. The Red Mage is your jack of all trades, but you only get ever up to level 3 magic, which does give you access to spells like Life and Cure 2, and then Fire 2, Ice 2, Bolt 2. So your level 2 elemental magics plus some good healing. He's able to abuse sleep like the Black Mage or the Mystic Knight can, which does trivialize a few fights. And early on, your elemental magic can be useful. However, he really falls off pretty quickly, and while being a jack of all trades, is really much weaker than any other specialized class. You do eventually, if you put in a lot of grinding and effort, can max out your 999 AP level 4 ability X Magic, which allows you to cast 2 spells in a turn, which is pretty useful. Has some interesting things you can do with it, such as Life and Cure on the same turn to get a dead target up and running. X Magic, when paired with other casters, can be also super useful. Double Flare from a Black Mage, Double Holy from a White Mage, and other such things can be useful. But overall, Red Mage is more of a niche pick, but I'm almost inclined to put him in the C tier. We'll put him in the C tier here. More often than not, with a C tier, we're saying you'd rather have just something else. And that's my opinion on the Red Mage. So next up on the list is Beastmaster. Now, Beastmaster, I believe, we're getting into our the next crystal's worth of jobs. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Beastmaster is a fire crystal job. Now, Beastmaster is a class I'm less familiar. Oh, excuse me. Berserker does come in as a water crystal job. And again, while Berserker will have decent physical damage always, his ability to not control himself can be more of a liability, especially against bosses who counterattack. So in general, we'll put him in the C tier. You would rather have something else. Okay, now to the Beastmaster. Beastmaster I'm less familiar with, but I'm inclined to think that the Beastmaster probably fits more in a B tier. And we'll put him high B tier because I know the Beastmaster can do some pretty crazy stuff and will be good in certain parties rather than others. You do gain access to some pretty unique abilities. The Tame command, I'm able to cause stop on certain creatures. The Control ability, super useful when paired with a blue mage and can just be generally useful. Against certain monsters, you're able to farm certain or grind in certain encounters that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. He does have the ability to equip whips, which is generally not useful. But the main thing, and which is his inherent ability and his maxed ability, is catch and release. We're able to capture certain monsters and release them to do certain effects. So if you're able to put in the time and set up certain catches for certain bosses, he can be good. But I'm inclined to say that part of his gameplay makes him a more niche pick. So we're going to rate the Beastmaster actually in the B tier. But I'd be willing to hear somebody's argument for why the Beastmaster could be maybe an A tier. But I'm less familiar. The Geomancer is the next on our list. And again, we're going to put Geomancer in the C tier. He does have access, you know, he's a magic-based class, but his inherent ability, Terrain, performs a spell-like action for 0 MP. And so you're able to dish out certain elemental and other interesting magic without having to spend MP. However, the times where it's actually useful are pretty few and far between. Most of the time you'd rather have any other magic-based class. He does have the ability to see the fake floors and avoid damage floors. But usually there's other ways around that, or just you don't need to worry about it. It's not a super interesting class. His weapon type, the Bell, unique weapon, generally isn't useful for damage either. So yeah, Geomancer's not the best class. Although in a few situations can be useful, but... So, next up, one of the best classes, Ninja. And we're going to put Ninja... I don't think we're going to put Ninja quite in the S tier. Maybe, though. Maybe high S tier, or high A tier, low S tier. I'm going to put him in the A tier for now. As always, pretty generally useful. His inherent ability to dual wield makes him a great physical damage dealer, and his inherent ability Throw can help him also be able to do certain magic damage. His inherent magic is low, so if you're able to pair a magic transfer ability with the Ninja, he becomes even better. Because of the scrolls, you're able to do lightning, water, and fire damage, elemental damage, which can be pretty useful. The other thing that's pretty useful about the Ninja is his ability Smoke, which is similar to the Thief's Flee ability. However, you get the benefit of having an even better class to get it from. So flees from battle. He has another interesting ability, Image, which is able to negate the next 2 physical attacks, which is similar, which is, I should say, identical to the spell Image that the White Mage learns. Which can be useful against certain bosses that are physical based. He does have a passive ability he learns, First Attack, that's able to drastically increases the chance of getting first strikes in battle. And then his ultimate ability is he's able to transfer the ability to dual wield, which can be useful with a bunch of other classes as well. There's the classic synergy between a ninja and another class. The ranger, where you learn X fight, can set up the one of the most potentially broken physical damage dealers. So generally speaking, you always love having a ninja, and borders on the broken tier with the right setup can be quite broken. Next up, the Bard. This might surprise some people, but I think Bard is actually a A-tier class. He does start off kind of slow, but I consider the Bard to be a generally always useful class once you get into it a little bit. His ability, his inherent ability, Sing, if you're able to learn all the songs, he's not as good in boss encounters per se, but the ability to regen the whole party can help keep you healthy. Love Song, you're able to inflict stop on all enemies, always useful for just random battles. Just stop pretty much everything. You can just stun lock random battles, so you don't ever have to worry about random battles as much. You're able to Charm, can be super useful in a lot of situations. Requiem, against any undead enemy, the Bard actually is able to put out a lot of good damage. And then once you get to Act 2, Act 3, it's where the Bard really starts to shine between Speed Song, Magic Song, Power Song, and Hero Song. Usually the main two you'll go for are Speed Song or Hero Song. So these four, it kind of locks you in to be singing, but as long as you keep singing, and you keep singing as long as you don't get hit, you're able to boost your party stats. So by doing Speed Song, you can boost your agility, and so you start gaining much more turns, much more action economy, if you will. And then Hero Song, the other most useful one, is it increases your levels. And levels are how stats are calculated. Levels are pretty valuable in terms of your damage output. So being able to increase your whole party's levels is pretty strong. So generally speaking, having a Bard around is actually pretty good. He doesn't have any great ability transfers. Equip Harps does give agility and magic, but generally, if you're going to transfer something, you're going to put Sing onto people. You do have the ability Hide, which can be useful time from time. And Harps aren't terrible. Some of them have some unique effects, but overall, I think the Bard is a pretty good class. So next up is Ranger. I'm actually going to put Ranger in the B tier. Ranger by itself can do some interesting things. You are able to do physical damage from the back row. You are able to have access to some elemental and other useful effects like the Darkness Bow. Having a chance to blind can be useful in a lot of situations. Killer Bow, having a chance at instant death, and some other things. But for the most part, the Ranger isn't going to be as useful in some fights. You do eventually get your ultimate ability of X fight, so with the right setup, will eventually be good. But until you hit that point, the Ranger is more of a niche. So you might argue for a A-tier spot with X fight, but I'm going to go ahead and leave him in the B tier. We'll put him up towards the front. I mean, maybe even here. Because it is... You kind of need the right team, I think, to get the most out of having a Ranger. But can be pretty useful in the right circumstances. I could, be convinced he could be an A-tier class. Next up is Samurai. And Samurai is the first of our getting into the final crystal jobs. I'm going to go ahead and actually put Samurai in S tier, despite the fact that I don't have as much experience using Samurai in Four Job Fiestas. But his inherent ability, Guild Toss, is pretty darn broken. It goes off of level, so when you do have the ability to buff his level, or just grind for levels, Guild Toss becomes incredibly powerful AoE damage, which is useful in a lot of situations. You do have some other interesting things. His max ability, Slash, in certain translations, it has a high chance of just killing everything, so useful for getting through random encounters. Its ability to equip katanas is pretty strong. Katanas having a inherent chance for critical hits, super useful. You're able to wear heavy armor, so you're able to deal a lot of damage and take a lot of hits. You're never going to be sad about having the ability to Guild Toss. It's going to be great damage pretty much anywhere in the game, and will be pretty broken in certain fights. So the Samurai is going to be our second class to actually make it all the way up into S tier, meaning pretty universally good in all situations. So useful against bosses, useful against random encounters, pretty good. Next up, the Dragoon. The Dragoon. Dragoon is going to be going down in the C tier. The Dragoon isn't really able to do much that other classes can't do better. His inherent ability, Jump, spends a turn to get double damage on the next turn, which sounds good in theory. You can avoid attacks, however, more often than not, you're just leaving your more squishy team vulnerable while you're jumping. The damage isn't amazing on it. You are able to wear heavy armor, but if you're jumping all the time, you're not even taking much hits. So it kind of, I don't know, has its own anti-synergy. It does have a couple useful things that it can be used with other classes, like the Lancet ability that functions as an HP and MP drain. Can be useful to put onto the other magic-based classes as a way to refill MP and HP, but generally not terribly useful. Equip Spear. Spears aren't a great weapon compared to some of the other weapon types in the game, and its strength transfer isn't very high. So generally speaking, you'd want anything else than a Dragoon. There is some interesting synergy between Dragoon and the next class on the list, I believe, Dancer, but that's not likely to happen in much, or that's not going to happen in any normal runs. It'd have to be a random or chaos kind of a run. But Dancer, I'm going to go ahead and put in A tier. I kind of want him high up. Surprisingly, the Dancer is pretty generally useful. Swords Dance, while it is random, is going to be good damage at pretty much any point in the game. And often once you hit late game, aka you get access to the chicken knife, Sword Dance becomes pretty incredible damage output, and becomes more consistent late in the game with the Dancer's unique equipment. You do gain Equip Ribbon, which ribbons are amazing pieces of equipment. It gives you, I think, almost full status immunity, plus I think it's +5 to all the main stats. So really good. Even some of the Dancer's secondary effects can be useful. Tempting Tango from time to time. The ability to charm. The other abilities, the Dancer learns Flirt. Can probably be useful. But generally speaking, I think you're best off just mashing the dance button Getting those sword dances is pretty good. So I like the Dancer class a lot. And has a lot of potential synergies with other classes. So it also, generally speaking, I'd say it's pretty universally useful. And now I think the last Earth Crystal job, the Chemist. So the Chemist is going to be the next in the S tier. So the Chemist can do almost everything. Chemist, I think, is arguably the best support class in the game. You have access to some of the best healing possible between just your inherent pharmacology passive ability, which doubles the usefulness of healing items, just random use, and then the mix ability is incredibly useful. Able to do a lot of useful buffs on the party, buffing elemental damage, buffing elemental resistances, even some useful debuffs, some of the best healing, and then one of the most useful things the Chemist can actually do is two mixes, one called Samson Power, one called Dragon Power, which you're able to do plus 10 levels and plus 20 levels. Super useful for buffs to put on a lot of classes. Any physical damage, ninja, dancer, samurai, knight, monk, thief, will benefit a lot from getting levels. And even any magic user, he's going to have the best access to restore MP. So if you have any other magic users in your party, just always, you love seeing a Chemist. They're pretty broken. It does require perhaps a little bit of grinding to get the unique Chemist mixes. He's able to trivialize a few fights with Death Potion, a few bosses. Yeah, really great class. I've used the Chemist a number of times in runs, and it's been probably the MVP, even though he inherently doesn't really do much damage. He can equip knives, and so from time to time I do have my Chemists wielding chicken knives and going to town. There have been runs where I would give my Chemist a chicken knife and have him berserk himself and just go to town. So he can still actually, you can have Chemists that are one of your main damage dealers as well. The drink ability also, which is inherent ability, can be pretty useful as well. Haste yourself, give yourself double HP, which can be pretty useful against if you do have trouble beating Titan early on in the game. Giving yourself a health tonic or whatever it's called, Giant's Drink, will give you enough HP to survive his death counter. Yeah, Chemist, really great class. So that's it for the main classes. Now we have the Game Boy Advance jobs, and I have no experience with them, so they're going to just sit here down in D tier. Now we have Freelancer and Mime, or Mimic. So these are pretty interesting. There's only certain categories of Four Job Fiesta runs that even have these possible. In random or chaos runs, where you have to do some of the early crystals without any jobs, you're going to have to stick with Freelancer and then Mime. So for Freelancer, because kind of what our B tier represents, the niche usefulness. So obviously, if you do have Freelancer, does open up some possibilities early on in the game. If you are stuck with Freelancer for a while, it's not terrible. Because you have access to any equipment in the game, you can kind of abuse that to get you through the early game. And so breaking rods early on, able to use the whip on Garula is one niche strategy. You're able to equip katanas and other things early on. So can get you by until if you do get stuck with a multiple Earth Crystal jobs early on in a random kind of a run. But is generally going to be niche and dependent on what the rest of your Four Job Fiesta party setup is to determine his usefulness. Now, Mime is another interesting one that I think would probably be the same, in that it's going to depend on what else you have. So in the context of a Four Job Fiesta, the Mime would probably rank lower, and the Freelancer as well, than in a run where you had more free access to switching between jobs, and you could set up more powerful scenarios for yourself with either Freelancer or Mimic. But that's going to be our tier list. So we're going to go ahead and end that off. Let me know what you think. And we should, if we get a good response, we'll probably do some more content related to the Four Job Fiesta. Thanks for watching. See you next time.